So first, welcome everyone to the Street Shul. I'd like to thank Rabbi Yuter for coming. I'd like to thank
It's my honor, my pleasure.
for coming and for setting this up. Thank the sponsor and really thanking you for also forcing me to think about something like a lot more in depth and carefully than I otherwise would consider, such as what is this thing called memory. So first, I wanted to do one source to just get a discussion going about how do we remember. Could you read the first source that we have in English? Oh, sorry. You want to do the first one in English then? This is a Sifri from Dvarim Ki Teitze 296.
Remember with one's mouth. Do not forget with one's heart.
So there's a distinction here between Zachor. We remember the pet, also Gemara in Megillah, but Al Tishkach, not forgetting, is in our heart. What do you think is the difference between Zachor and Al Tishkach? Doing something orally versus, I guess, there's no adjective hard, like mentally, or what do you think? What are some of the differences between them?
Remembering is more intellectual, memorizing things, as opposed to feeling something.
Okay.
In a lasting way.
Any thoughts?
Not yet.
Emotionally would mean that you don't go on vacation and visit an anti-Semitic country, which many Jews do in Brooklyn. Okay, I don't know that.
Wait, are you saying Brooklyn's an anti-Semitic country? I'm not sure. I didn't quite catch that. So when the Gemara discusses like Zachor, it's in a context of the Megillah of why it has to be said orally. And there are a couple of important distinctions here. Something's internal, you can keep to yourself, you hold it on with you. My father would point out that the word Zachor is from Akkadian of Zakaru, which means to mention. When you mention it, you need to articulate it in a way. Meaning, how often, like if you had an idea that made sense to you, but you just couldn't get it out there. Or, you had an idea in your head, you just couldn't put it on paper. Right? There's an important, like you can have it, that's Al Tishkach, you can keep it with you. But for Zechirah, you'll actually need to have some means of transmission of articulating it in a way that you can communicate it to somewhere outside of you. And we come to, what I want to go through the rest of the sources here, is discuss what I call 3 components of applied memory. And I called it this because we're not just talking about remembering things, it's, well, how do you apply those memories that you have to different situations, or your own contemporary situations? We'll discuss 3 components of this, discuss some of the risks, and then we'll hopefully have a discussion on some modern day examples of some challenges. So the first component I have here is simply define what happened. And for examples, I want to use one of our Sheish Zichirot, one of the 6 things that we're commanded to remember, and the one that is probably most appropriate for discussion based on Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, is Zichirat Amalek, remembering what Amalek did to us. But first, we have to know, what did Amalek do to us? Well, I didn't know what the source is for some reason. Anyway, passage is Shemot, Exodus 17, 8 through 13. Just do the English if you like.
Sure. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim, and Moshe said to Yehoshua, "Choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." So Yehoshua did as Moshe said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moshe, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moshe held up his hands that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moshe's hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on each side, and one on one side and one on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Yehoshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword.
They lived happily ever after, at least some of them did. So, just reading this one paragraph, this is how the narrative is described in Shemot. What seems to be the major focus of this particular passage?
The victory.
Not yet the victory.
Or the strategy.
Supporting Moshe.
Yeah, the victory strategy, supporting Moshe, hands up, win, hands down, lose. So, there's some connection. Let's just prop up his hands and we're going to win. That seems to be the focus. But if we go on to the next source, how are we supposed to remember Amalek when we're given that? Well, I'll do this Devarim 25, 17 to 19. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way you were coming out of Egypt. how he met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks and the stragglers at your rear, when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around, in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you blot out the remembrance of Amalek under heaven. You shall not forget. Anyone notice a difference between what we're supposed to remember and how it's actually described? Right?
Very different.
Very different. By the way, little tip here, you can actually get a lot of mileage in terms of Divrei Torah, comparing Devarim, like the re-descriptions of Devarim with where it happened earlier in the Torah, particularly Shemot. Really rich stuff if you're ever stuck. But sure, so, I mean, you actually have almost, it's like a completely different story here, right? And it's not that they're mutually exclusive, mind you. It's not that it's not that the story in Exodus, where it talks about the hand raising, hand lowering in the victory, in any way contradicts what we have in Devarim about the focus about Amalek coming and attacking Israel from behind, and particularly, the ones who were, weakest, the stragglers, right? But these are two very different stories here. One is what happened, or at least as we have a description, and the other is what is it that we're supposed to remember, right? Now, when you think about any of the major events that you're trying to, reconstruct, there are so many details, especially, today, people will really try to pick out as many details as possible, but you're always going to miss something, or what is going to be a relevant or significant piece of information that you're supposed to carry on with you. And depending what pieces of information you take, in terms of what are the things you're remembering from this event, is certainly going to impact what it is that you're going to remember. And in the third section, oh, sure.
It almost reminds me a little bit of like the tension between the way Israel and America celebrate Yom HaShoah. Mm-hmm. Like what happened sounds like more of like an Israel story, right? Like the Jews were fighters, they were partisans. It's Yom HaShoah, the Hagvura, like it's this thing where there were other people around. Whereas the second story is like a little bit more of like a, I don't know, Yehoshua's not mentioned, right?
Nope.
As like a victor. Moshe's not mentioned as
nothing
a leader.
About the hands.
So to me that sounds more of like a sheep to the slaughter, if God had not intervened type story, than a story of like Bnei Israel's power and strength as like a military force.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're getting close to the second section. To the third section, I mean. Yeah?
Yeah, and potentially we see the first case through the eyes of the leaders, and maybe this is the case through the eyes of the people, how they felt.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are plenty of possibilities, but now you're getting into the third section, which is, once we, component one, what happened? Component two, what do we remember? And component three I call Midrash. I mean, I know that's an unoriginal name, but by Midrash, I mean, what are the consequences? What are the things that we're supposed to take out of these memories? And this is where you have the actual application. So I'll just quote from one Midrash from Shemot Rabbah in Bishalach. What is written in this connection? And the name of the place was called Masa and Meribah, trial and strife. What was the strife there? This was the subject of discussion between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemiah, and the sages. Rabbi Yehuda said, this is what they argued. If it be the Lord of all works, as he is Lord over us, we will serve him. But if not, we will rebel against him. Rabbi Nechemiah said, if he will supply us with sufficient food, like a king who dwells in a city without its inhabitants having constant recourse to him, then we will serve him. But if not, we will rebel against him. Our sages said, if we entertain thoughts in our hearts, and he knows what we are thinking, then we will serve him. But if not, we will rebel against him. God thereupon said to them, if your intention is to test me, let the wicked one come and test you. Straightway we read, then came Amalek. And it continues, what is written there, the Lord is among us or not? Then came Amalek. What is the connection between the two? It can be compared to a small child seated on his father's shoulders, who, beholding a friend of his father, called out, have you seen my father? The father then said, you are riding upon my shoulders, yet you inquire of my whereabouts? I will cast you down so that the enemy may come and master you. This is what God said to Israel. I have borne you on clouds of glory, yet you come and say, is the Lord among us or not? Let the enemy come, therefore, and prevail over you. Hence, then came Amalek. Now, I particularly picked this Midrash because it would give you a completely different spin than what you might think. If you just focused on the Zechirah part of like what you remember from Amalek, which we, oh, Amalek is really bad. Amalek attacked, the weakest of the Jews. You see the Midrash, what would you say might be the focus of the remembering that you would do for generations?
Jews doubt.
Yeah, Jews doubt or don't doubt God. It's a pretty big difference there. And of course there are other Midrashim, but the point is, even once you have the memories, you don't always know what you're doing with them, or at least what you do with them can be taken in any number of ways. So now, and this is why I have my own separate source sheet here. I'm going to go through a couple of quotes and ask certain questions of quotes. So first one is, who do you think said the following line, or when do you think it could have been said? We make war that we may live in peace.
Anytime in history, or what do you mean?
Go for it. When do you think? Like, who do you think would be someone who would say that? We make war that we may live in peace.
Israeli army.
You say Israeli army?
I don't know.
No idea? Well, who does it sound like? If not, if you don't know the person, who do you think it sounds like? Golda Meir. Israeli army. Oh, good. Aristotle. But close. Meaning, this is an idea which you could certainly see.
Way off.
Well, you're all way off, but it's a very generic type of statement that could be applied elsewhere. Let's go to the Holocaust, move on a bit. I'm going to have a quote, and I want you to tell me who do you think said it. This is around the time of the Holocaust. 1. Your soldiers are doing the same work of destruction as the Germans. I want you to fight Nazism without arms.
Gandhi. Sorry.
Very good. No, that was it. Wow.
I
Impressive.
remember that. I will tell you a story.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting people to get that one. Certainly not so fast.
That really, I mean,
Wow.
that, he said that. and
Dramatic
more.
impact is completely gone.
Yeah.
Well, okay, well.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, but over.
No, I'm impressed. Look, you've
She's
impressed
gonna
me
read
with
it,
that.
that's right. Yeah.
Let me just read another quote to drive this point home. This is a quote from Louis Fisher's book, Gandhi and Stalin, Two Signs at the Crossroads. Hitler, Gandhi solemnly affirmed, killed 5 million Jews. It is the greatest crime of our time. But the Jews should have offered themselves to the butcher's knife. They should have thrown themselves into the sea from the cliffs. I believe in harakiri. I do not believe in militaristic connotations, but it is a historical method, a heroic method, You think, the author said, that the Jews should have committed collective suicide? Yes, Gandhi agreed. That would have been heroism. It would have aroused the world and the people of Germany to the evils of Hitler's violence, especially in 1938 before the war. As it is, they succumbed anyway in their millions.
Is that word of Masada?
This was with Buber.
Uh,
This was a conversation with Martin Buber.
Could be. I got the quote from the book.
Uh-huh.
Right. So here you've got Gandhi, who is known as this great pacifist and is revered, right, for being anti-violence, who is offering a suggestion, of what the Jews ought to have done that would have resulted in the deaths of many, many, many more people. Before the war, you had a great deal of anti-interventionists. You had people who were pacifists. I dare say militant pacifism. Like, war is evil at any cost. All right? Throw in another analogy later in our history from another lesson from the Holocaust, meaning you can take a look at the Holocaust from many different ways of what are the things that you should learn from it. One thing that people would learn from the Holocaust is, well, we'll actually do that quote a little bit later. Good thing I caught myself. So here, who do you think said this and in what context? It was a time when a certain amount of cynicism and moral confusion set in amongst Western democracies, when those who warned about the coming crisis, the crisis of fascism and Nazism, they were ridiculed or ignored. Indeed, in the decades before World War II, a great many argued that the fascist threat was exaggerated or that it was someone else's problem. Some nations tried to negotiate a separate peace, even as the enemy made its deadly ambitions crystal clear. It was, as Winston Churchill observed, a bit like feeding a crocodile, hoping it would eat you last. There was a strange innocence about the world. Someone recently recalled one U.S. senator's reaction in September of 1939 upon hearing that Hitler had invaded Poland to start World War II. He exclaimed, quote, "Lord, if only I had talked to Hitler, all of this might have been avoided." Anyone want to take a guess when and who said this?
Read the last sentence again.
Lord, if only I had talked to Hitler, all of this might have been avoided. But that was
That's
him
the
quoting a
sentence.
senator from 39.
I
This,
don't mean the last, I meant the last part.
there was a strange innocence about the world. Someone recently recalled one U.S. senator's reaction.
Oh,
It's like George Bush or something.
Close, actually. Donald Rumsfeld in 2006. You try to apply, the lessons of the Holocaust today. What are those lessons? You're going to say, well, you see injustice, we should go fight them. Yet, with the Iraq War, you had a great deal of opposition on peace grounds. And here, Rumsfeld is making that same connection, almost that midrash, if you will, of saying, well, in the time of Hitler, such and such a thing happened. This is happening, or seeming to happen today, and therefore, we should go to war. All right? But I actually even printed out somewhat of a snarky sign here. There was a website I came across many years ago called Protest Warrior. And what they did was they actually protested left-wing protests that were against the war, arguing things to the logical conclusion. So one sign that I've printed out from them here goes, except for ending slavery, fascism, Nazism, and communism, war has never solved anything.
What's the website called again?
Protestwarrior.com. There was also, the other one that I remember was Saddam only killed his own people, it's none of our business. And they were taking, I'm not sure how many, you may remember, you were probably very active in that. You remember what a lot of the people on the left were saying of, get out of Iraq and moral war. But these are very big moral quandaries, especially once you try applying the lessons of the past to the present.
I think you have to be careful. I mean, I think Iraq and the Holocaust are different.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I would say Sudan is maybe more analogous to the Holocaust today. So it is frustrating when someone takes what you feel like is your history and applies it to a lesson that you don't think is the same.
I've even got a better one for you for that. And this I noticed recently in the gun control debate, people invoking the Holocaust. There was one particular site that I got the following quote to basically hammer home the point of why gun restrictions are bad. The most foolish, this is a quote attributed to Adolf Hitler, have the website here. The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subject races to possess arms. History shows us that all conquerors who have allowed their subject races to carry arms have prepared their own downfall by doing so. Indeed, I would go so far as to say that the supply of arms to the underdogs is a sine qua non for the overthrow of any sovereignty. So, let's not have any native militia or native police. German troops alone will bear the sole responsibility for the maintenance of law and order throughout the occupied Russian territories, and a system of military strongpoints must be evolved to cover the entire occupied country. Right? So the lesson here is, well, Hitler took away gun rights, therefore in America, we ought to oppose any form of gun restrictions on the same grounds of, first they came for the guns. Now, I'm not I know certain people here are going to object to those analogies, if not find them offensive. But is it necessarily wrong? In a sense, the same steps are being done. What happened in the past? What are the details that you choose to remember it? And what are the midrashim that you're trying to apply to today? Until a few months ago, I would not have thought anyone said the lesson of the Holocaust is everyone should have firearms, right? But, lo and behold, that's a connection. When you think about, even something like the Holocaust and Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and Yom HaAtzmaut, right? You can view those in many different ways. Never again to say we need a more militant approach to things, right? You can say never again as the pacifists did. The author of the book from whom I got most of the quotes, I got from a book called Human Smoke by Nicholas Baker, which I recommend everyone read. It's a fantastic book on the Holocaust because it takes snippets of public quotes and he sort of weaves a narrative that you wouldn't necessarily see. And the subtitle is The End of Civilization. And one of the things he helps demonstrate is, even in retrospect, Nazis were evil and, the Western allies did a lot of good to end Nazism, but they were far from tzaddikim in their own right. They were far from righteous. Many statements attributed to Churchill do portray him as somewhat of a warmonger, right? So even though he might have been correct in vanquishing the Nazis, you can understand why it would have been hard for people to get behind him.
Certainly all these people did not exert themselves in trying to say truth.
Well, actually, one person did, and this is what the quote is. There was a guy named Clarence Pickett who is cited in the book, and it says here, "I dedicate this book to the memory of Clarence Pickett and the other American and British pacifists. They never really gotten their due. They tried to save Jewish refugees, feed Europe, reconcile the United States and Japan, and stop the war from happening. They failed, but they were right." Their voices didn't really get heard that much because they got drowned out. He writes about their attempts of sending food through the blockades, trying to lobby against the quota system. Did it work? No. But his take is the pacifists had it right. But but you could also argue that the pacifists might have had it right up to a point. Like once you see that Germany is posing a threat, well, you could argue pacifism would have been really bad because more people were getting murdered. On the other hand, nice little quote from George Washington, to be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. So the ultimate point here is, I started a subtitle is The Risks and the Rewards, is that it's very easy to say, never again, remember what happened and this is how we should apply it. But if there's any, but there's so many nuances and so many details. Is your current situation exactly like it was before? If anything, people can and will apply past lessons to suit whatever needs that they want or whatever ideologies that they already have. If anything, I think the one thing that we ought to break is to actually take steps back. Remember, try to figure out, again, what are those facts? Make sure that we're remembering the appropriate facts relevant. And whatever midrash that we try to apply for the future actually might make sense. Because you can say how pacifism can prevent many needless deaths. But pacifism can also cause many needless deaths if you don't take active intervention. And you apply things today for, say, the state of Israel. Which side is correct? I have no idea. Terrorism? No idea either. Both sides have an element of truth based on how they happen to be choosing to remember. Now, you see, this is a great deal of responsibility, but can only come out once you actually do it bepeh, and you force yourself to step back and articulate it in such a way to tell it to someone else. Because once I tell you, like, here's my spin, you can hear it and you can say, wow, that is really absurd. And here are all the things that you're missing. And then you can have sort of a dialogue. If you keep it to yourself, you don't really have zechirah, or at least not of a useful zechirah. You just have whatever ideas that you want to keep to yourself, and no one's going to challenge you, and the narrative will make sense in your head.